My sister refused to take care of my son for just one day, even after I had paid for her entire wedding. She said, "I'm not your maid." So I took a drastic step. Before continuing the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories, and leave your like on the video. My name is Alexandra, and 3 hours ago I did something that will change my family forever. I canceled my sister's entire wedding, a wedding I had been paying for completely, and I'm not sorry. The last call I made was to the florist, canceling the imported orchids that cost more than my monthly mortgage. As I hung up, my hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in months, I felt absolutely calm. The silence in my apartment was deafening after weeks of constant wedding planning chaos, but it was the most peaceful silence I'd experienced in years. My phone is buzzing nonstop on the kitchen counter. 53 missed calls and counting. I can see the names flashing, Mom, Dad, Minha Irma, over and over again. But I'm not answering. Not yet. I need these quiet moments to process what just happened, because honestly, I'm still trying to believe I actually did it. Let me be clear about something. I'm a trauma surgeon. I save lives for a living. I make split-second decisions under pressure that can mean the difference between life and death. I've never been impulsive or reckless. Every choice I make is calculated, measured, thought through completely. So when I tell you that canceling this wedding was the most rational decision I've made in years, I need you to understand that I mean it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You're probably wondering how a successful doctor ends up in a situation where she's financing her sister's entire wedding, only to cancel it at the last minute. The truth is, this story doesn't start today. It doesn't even start when my sister announced her engagement 6 months ago. This story begins years ago with a pattern of behavior that I was too loyal, too hopeful, and frankly too stupid to see clearly until today. I grew up being the responsible one. While my sister was getting her nails done and posting Instagram stories about her latest shopping sprees, I was studying for medical school entrance exams. While she was dating a series of unemployed guys who looked like they stepped out of a boy band, I was working through residency, saving every penny I could. My parents were always so proud of her social life, her beauty, her ability to light up a room. Meanwhile, I was just practical, reliable, the one who would figure things out. After I finally established my practice, something shifted in our family dynamic. Suddenly, I wasn't just the responsible daughter anymore. I was the successful daughter, the one with money. And with that success came expectations I never agreed to. At first, it was small things. Help with mom and dad's mortgage when dad's business was struggling. A few $100s here and there to help with family expenses. I was happy to help. These are my parents, after all. But then I started noticing things. Designer purses appearing in my sister's closet, new cars, expensive dinners she'd post about online. When I asked my parents about it, they'd get uncomfortable and change the subject. It took me months to piece together what was happening. The money I was giving them wasn't staying with them. It was being redistributed to fund my sister's lifestyle, and everyone just expected me to be okay with it because I was the one who had it to spare. The breaking point should have come then, but it didn't. I should have cut off the financial support and forced everyone to face reality. Instead, I convinced myself that family loyalty meant swallowing my resentment and continuing to be the reliable safety net everyone took for granted. Growing up in the Morrison household meant understanding an unspoken hierarchy that I didn't fully grasp until I was well into adulthood. My sister was the princess, and I was the workhorse. She got the pink bedroom with the canopy bed. I got the smaller room that doubled as Dad's home office. She got dance lessons and pageant entries. I got library cards and secondhand textbooks. It wasn't necessarily malicious. My parents genuinely believed they were playing to our strengths. She was their social butterfly, and I was their little scholar. The problem was that this dynamic created a family structure where my achievements were expected, and her needs were prioritized. When I graduated valedictorian, the celebration dinner lasted about an hour because we had to rush to my sister's cheerleading competition. When I got accepted to medical school with a partial scholarship, my parents were proud but immediately started worrying about how they'd help with my remaining expenses. When my sister decided she wanted to try modeling and needed professional headshots that cost $1,500, they found the money somewhere. I learned early that love in our family was measured differently for each of us. My sister received unconditional adoration regardless of what she did or didn't accomplish. My love was earned through grades, achievements, and increasingly, financial contributions. I became the family fixer, the one everyone turned to when problems needed practical solutions. After medical school and residency, when I finally started earning real money, the pattern intensified. My parents would call with emergencies, The water heater breaking, unexpected car repairs, medical bills they couldn't handle. I always said yes, because that's what a good daughter does, right? But I started noticing that these emergencies coincided suspiciously with my sister's desire for new things. The monthly allowance I provided my parents, which I thought was helping them maintain their dignity in retirement, was actually funding my sister's spa appointments, her weekend trips to the coast, her constantly rotating wardrobe of designer clothes she'd wear once and forget about. She was 26 years old, living rent-free in our parents' house, with no job, no responsibilities, and apparently no sense of irony about the situation. What hurt wasn't the money itself. I was doing well financially, and helping family should be a privilege of success. What hurt was the complete lack of acknowledgement. My sister never thanked me, never even mentioned where her lifestyle was actually coming from. In her mind, and apparently everyone else's, she deserved these things simply by virtue of being who she was. Meanwhile, I was working 60-hour weeks, raising my 8-year-old daughter Emma as a single mother, and somehow still finding time to be everyone else's emergency contact. When my sister got a DUI, guess who got the call at 2 in the morning? When she decided she wanted to take art classes in Europe for a summer, guess who was expected to make that dream possible? The worst part was how she treated me during family gatherings. She'd make subtle comments about my work clothes, my lack of a social life, my practical car. To everyone else, these seemed like sisterly teasing, but they carried an undertone of superiority that stung. Here I was, funding her entire existence, and she acted like I was the one who should be grateful for her presence in our lives. I kept telling myself this was temporary, that eventually she'd grow up, get serious about her life, maybe show some appreciation for everything our family was doing for her. I believed that unconditional support would eventually inspire her to become more independent and responsible. I was naive enough to think that love and patience could change someone who didn't see any reason to change. The moment I truly understood how naive I'd been was during last year's Thanksgiving dinner. I was sitting at our family table, exhausted from a particularly brutal week at the hospital, when my sister casually mentioned her new handbag, a designer piece that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was showing it off to our cousin, explaining how she'd been saving up for months for this purchase. Saving up. With what income? She hadn't worked a real job in over 3 years. I excused myself to help our mother in the kitchen, but really I needed a moment to process the absurdity of what I'd just heard. In the kitchen, I found receipts scattered across the counter, evidence of Mom's latest grocery run that I'd funded, along with what looked like credit card statements. I couldn't help but notice the dates and amounts, and everything started clicking into place. The $1,500 I'd sent for their emergency roof repair the previous month had been spent the same day my sister posted Instagram photos of her shopping spree at the premium outlets. The $2,000 I'd transferred for Dad's medical tests coincided exactly with my sister's weekend spa retreat. Every family emergency I'd responded to corresponded with some new luxury in my sister's life. I confronted my parents quietly that evening, hoping there was some explanation I was missing. Mom got defensive immediately, claiming they needed to help my sister find herself, and that my success meant I should be happy to support family. Dad looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict her. The conversation ended with Mom crying and saying I was being selfish for questioning how they chose to spend money I'd given them. But the real wake-up call came 3 weeks later when I overheard my sister on the phone with a friend, laughing about how easy it was to get money from our parents. I just have to mention something I want, and somehow they always figure out how to make it happen, she said, clearly amused by the situation. It's like having wealthy parents without any of the pressure to actually be successful myself. Wealthy parents. She thought our parents were wealthy. She had no idea that every dollar she was spending came directly from my paychecks, from overtime shifts I was pulling at the hospital, from sacrifices I was making in my own life and my daughter's life. In her mind, money just appeared when she needed it, as if by magic. The irony was devastating. Here I was, a successful surgeon who could afford a comfortable life, and I was driving a 10-year-old sedan because I was funneling most of my disposable income to subsidize my sister's fantasy lifestyle. Emma was attending the local public school instead of the private academy I'd researched, because that tuition money was going toward my sister's art classes and yoga retreats, and whatever other hobby struck her fancy that month. And through it all, my sister treated me like I was somehow lesser than her. At family gatherings, she'd make comments about my boring life, my focus on work, my lack of romantic relationships. She acted like my practical approach to life was a character flaw, as if being responsible and hardworking were things to be pitied rather than respected. The most painful moment came during Emma's 8th birthday party, which I'd kept small and simple because I was trying to be more careful with expenses. My sister arrived late, made a comment about the cute little homemade decorations, and then spent the entire party on her phone, planning her next trip with friends. She didn't bring a gift, didn't help with setup or cleanup, and left early to meet someone for drinks. But she posted a selfie with Emma on her social media, captioned, "Love being the fun aunt," as if her mere presence was the highlight of the event. I realized that night that I wasn't helping my sister grow or find herself. I was enabling her to remain a permanent child, shielded from the reality that everyone else has to work for what they want in life. Worse, I was teaching my own daughter that family relationships are transactional. That love means accepting disrespect as long as you're helping someone financially. 6 months ago, my sister burst through my parents' front door like she was announcing the cure for cancer. I was there for our monthly family dinner, watching Emma play in the backyard while I helped set the table. The front door slammed open, and my sister practically flew into the dining room, her left hand thrust forward like a weapon. "I'm engaged!" she screamed, loud enough that our elderly neighbor probably heard it through the walls. The ring was massive. I'm talking about a diamond so large it looked almost cartoonish, set in what appeared to be platinum with smaller stones surrounding it. Even from across the room, I could tell this wasn't some budget engagement ring. This was the kind of ring that costs more than most people's cars. My parents went absolutely insane with excitement. Mom started crying immediately, pulling my sister into a hug and examining the ring from every angle. Dad was beaming, asking a dozen questions about proposal details and wedding plans. I stood there holding a stack of plates, trying to process what I was seeing and hearing. "Tell us everything," Mom demanded, and my sister launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech about how her boyfriend, who I'd never met and barely heard mentioned, had surprised her with a romantic beachside proposal just that morning. "He's incredibly successful," she explained breathlessly. "He owns multiple businesses, travels internationally for work, and he's been planning this proposal for months. He said he knew I was the one from our first date, and he wanted to make sure the ring was worthy of me." I finally found my voice, found my, "What's his name again? I don't think you've ever really told us about him." My sister's expression flickered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "His name is Connor, and you haven't met him because he's been traveling constantly for work. He's an import-export, deals with high-end clients all over the world. Very exclusive, very lucrative." The details she provided were oddly vague for someone describing the love of her life. She couldn't say exactly which cities he traveled to, what specific products he imported or exported, or even how long they'd been seriously dating. When I asked where he was now, she said he had to fly to Los Angeles immediately after the proposal for an emergency business meeting. But my parents didn't seem to notice the inconsistencies. They were too busy planning the wedding of the century, talking about venues and guest lists and whether 6 months was enough time to plan properly. My sister was eating up every second of attention, describing her vision for the perfect ceremony with the confidence of someone who had unlimited resources to make it happen. "We're thinking spring wedding, maybe at the Grandview Manor downtown," she said casually, as if she was suggesting a backyard barbecue instead of the most expensive wedding venue in our city. "Connor says money is no object when it comes to our special day. He wants me to have everything I've ever dreamed of." I did some quick mental math. Grandview Manor starts at $15,000 just for the venue rental, before food, flowers, music, or anything else. A wedding there could easily cost $40,000 or more, depending on how elaborate they wanted to make it. "That sounds expensive," I said carefully. "Are you sure Connor's business can handle that kind of expense while he's still building his companies?" My sister gave me a look like I'd just suggested she was marrying someone inappropriate. "Alexandra, Connor is incredibly successful. More successful than anyone in our family has ever been. Money really isn't a concern for us." The phrase "anyone in our family" hit me like a slap. I'm a surgeon. I've worked for over a decade to build a successful practice. I own my own home, support my daughter comfortably, and have been single-handedly funding our family's lifestyle for years. But apparently my sister's mysterious fiancé with his vague import-export business was more successful than my actual, verifiable career. Over the following weeks, the wedding planning consumed every family conversation. My sister would call me with updates about dress shopping, venue tours, and catering options, but Connor never seemed to be available to meet. He was always traveling, always in meetings, always just about to return from some important business trip that would get delayed at the last minute. 2 months after the engagement announcement, I got the call I should have seen coming. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was at the park with Emma when my phone rang. My mother's voice sounded strained, almost apologetic, which immediately put me on alert. "Alexandra, honey, we need to talk about the wedding," she began carefully. Could you maybe stop by the house this evening? There's been a complication. A complication. In our family's vocabulary, that was code for someone needs money and you're the only person who has it. I found my parents sitting at their kitchen table that evening, looking like they were about to deliver terrible news. My sister was conspicuously absent, which should have been my first clue about what this conversation was really about. The thing is, Dad started hesitantly, Connor's been having some cash flow issues with his business. Nothing permanent, just some international deals that got delayed due to shipping complications. His money is all tied up in inventory that's stuck in customs. I sat down slowly, already understanding where this was headed. And, well, your sister has her heart set on having the wedding as planned, Mom continued. She's already put deposits down on several vendors, and Connor feels terrible that his business situation might force them to postpone or scale back their dream wedding. How much are we talking about? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer would be astronomical. Dad cleared his throat. The total budget they'd settled on was around $35,000. Connor has assured us he'll pay back every penny once his business situation stabilizes, which should be within the next few months. $35,000 for one day. I felt my chest tighten as I processed the enormity of what they were asking. That was more than I'd spent on my own wedding years ago, more than I spent on my daughter's entire education expenses annually, more than most people make in 6 months. You want me to pay for my sister's entire wedding? I said flatly. Not pay for it, Mom corrected quickly. Loan the money to Connor. He's going to pay it back with interest once his deals go through. You'd actually make money on this arrangement. The awkward silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about how confident they really were in Connor's ability to repay this loan. If they truly believed he was good for the money, they would have found a way to borrow it themselves or suggested Connor get a business loan from an actual bank. Where's my sister during this conversation? I asked. Shouldn't she be here discussing her own wedding finances? She's too emotional about the whole situation, Dad explained. She's been crying for days about the possibility of having to cancel everything. Connor suggested we talk to you family to family, so she wouldn't have to go through the stress of explaining their financial situation. Family to family. As if this was some kind of collaborative decision instead of a desperate attempt to manipulate me into funding a wedding that the actual couple couldn't afford. I asked to see the contracts and deposit receipts my sister had already signed. The numbers were even worse than I'd imagined. She'd committed to a photographer who charged $8,000. The florist alone was $4,000. The dress she'd chosen cost $3,000. For a single day. For one outfit she'd never wear again. These are luxury prices, I pointed out. If money is tight, why didn't she choose more reasonable options? Connor insisted she shouldn't have to compromise on her dream wedding just because of temporary business difficulties. Mom explained. He said a woman like your sister deserves the best, and he didn't want her to feel like she was settling for less than she's worth. That phrase stuck with me. A woman like your sister. What did that mean exactly? A woman who'd never worked for anything in her life? A woman who expected other people to pay for her dreams while she contributed nothing? A woman who thought she deserved luxury simply by virtue of existing? They sat there looking at me with hopeful expressions, waiting for me to be the family hero once again. And despite every rational thought in my head screaming that this was a terrible idea, I felt the familiar weight of family obligation settling on my shoulders. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course, Dad said quickly. But the thing is, some of these deposits are due pretty soon, and if we don't secure the vendors... The unspoken threat was clear. If I didn't agree immediately, I'd be responsible for ruining my sister's wedding dreams. Against every instinct I possessed as both a doctor and a rational human being, I said yes. I agreed to pay for the entire wedding, justified by the promise that Connor would repay everything with interest once his business dealings were resolved. It was one of the stupidest decisions I've ever made, and I knew it even as the words were leaving my mouth. The moment I agreed, the dynamic in that kitchen shifted dramatically. The tension disappeared, my parents' faces lit up with relief, and suddenly I was no longer a daughter being asked for help. I was a solution to be managed and directed. Oh, thank you, sweetheart, Mom gushed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Your sister is going to be so relieved. You have no idea how worried she's been about this. But when my sister finally appeared at the house an hour later, her response wasn't relief or gratitude. It was a list of additional requirements. Now that the money issue is sorted out, she announced, I want to make sure we're all clear about expectations. This wedding needs to be perfect, which means I can't have anyone making decisions, that might embarrass me or reflect poorly on Connor's reputation. I stared at her, waiting for some acknowledgement of what I'd just agreed to do for her. Some thank you, some recognition that I was making an enormous personal sacrifice to fund her dream day. Instead, she pulled out a notebook filled with wedding details and started assigning me tasks. "I'll need you to handle all the vendor communication since you're the one with the financial relationship now," she said matter-of-factly. "But obviously, I'll be making all the actual decisions about flowers, food, music, everything important. I just need you to execute the payments and handle any problems that come up." Execute the payments. Handle the problems. I was being relegated to the role of wedding coordinator/ATM, responsible for all the stress and logistics but none of the creative decisions. $35,000, and my job was to shut up and write checks while my sister played bride. "What about Connor?" I asked. "When do I actually get to meet the man I'm essentially financing?" "He's still dealing with the customs situation," she said dismissively. "But he's incredibly grateful for what you're doing. He said it shows what kind of family values we have, how we support each other when it matters." Family values. I was supposed to feel proud that my willingness to bankroll their wedding demonstrated good family values. Meanwhile, where were my sister's family values when it came to acknowledging the sacrifice I was making? Over the next few days, my phone became a constant stream of wedding-related demands. The florist needed a deposit increase because my sister had decided she wanted additional centerpieces. The photographer required travel expenses because she'd changed the ceremony location to a more scenic spot outside the city. The caterer needed extra money because she'd upgraded from the standard package to the premium menu. Each change came with the same casual assumption that I would simply accommodate whatever she wanted. No consultation about budget impacts, no discussion about whether these upgrades were necessary, no recognition that every dollar she was adding represented hours of my life spent in operating rooms, dealing with trauma cases, making life-and-death decisions. The breaking point should have been when she called me at the hospital during a particularly difficult surgery day to complain that the wedding dress shop wanted a larger deposit than expected. I was literally between patients, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, and she was upset because her dress was going to cost $4,000 instead of $3,000. "Can't you just call them and put it on your credit card?" she asked impatiently. "I need to finalize this today so they can start the alterations." "I'm at work," I said. "I'm saving someone's life right now. Can this wait a few hours?" "Well, obviously your work is important," she replied with an edge to her voice. "But this dress situation is time-sensitive, and it's not like I'm asking you to do anything complicated. Just make a phone call." The bills started arriving like a tsunami. Each envelope contained another financial surprise that my sister had somehow forgotten to mention during our initial budget discussion. The venue required additional insurance, $800. The band needed a sound system upgrade, $1,200. The photographer wanted an assistant for the extended coverage my sister had requested, another $1,000. Every few days brought a new emergency that required immediate payment. The cake designer needed premium ingredients for the custom 5-tier design my sister had fallen in love with. The florist discovered that the imported orchids she'd insisted on were more expensive than originally quoted due to seasonal availability. The makeup artist required a trial run fee plus travel expenses for the early morning wedding day service. I found myself staying up late at night, going through credit card statements and bank balances, trying to figure out how to manage the mounting expenses without completely destroying my own financial stability. The original $35,000 estimate had already ballooned to over $42,000, and we were still 6 weeks away from the actual wedding date. The most infuriating part was how these additional costs were presented to me. My sister never called herself. It was always my parents, delivering the news with apologetic voices and stressed expressions. They'd clearly been designated as the messengers, tasked with softening the blow of each new financial demand. "Sweetheart, there's been another small complication with the catering," Mom would say, her voice tight with anxiety. "The venue requires them to use specific serving equipment that costs extra. And your sister just found out about it today." Small complication. Small. We were talking about an additional $1,500 for serving equipment that any professional caterer should have included in their original quote. I started asking to see the actual contracts and invoices instead of just taking everyone's word about these surprise costs. What I discovered was even worse than I'd suspected. My sister wasn't just agreeing to expensive options, she was upgrading everything to the most luxurious level available, apparently operating under the assumption that since someone else was paying, price was no object. The flowers weren't just imported orchids, they were rare varieties flown in from 3 different countries. The photography wasn't just professional coverage. It was a premium package that included engagement photos, bridal portraits, same-day editing, and custom photo albums. The catering wasn't just dinner. It was a 7-course tasting menu with wine pairings and specialty cocktails. When I confronted my parents about these upgrades, they looked genuinely confused. But Connor said he wanted her to have the best of everything, Dad explained. He was very specific that money shouldn't be a limiting factor for their special day. Connor isn't paying for any of this, I pointed out. I am. And I never agreed to unlimited spending. Well, no, but he's going to pay you back, Mom said weakly. And in the meantime, wouldn't you want your sister to have a beautiful wedding? This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. A once-in-a-lifetime event that was costing more than many people's annual salaries. I was beginning to understand that Connor's promise to repay everything was just a convenient fiction that allowed everyone to pretend this wasn't really my money being spent. The worst part was my sister's complete detachment from the financial reality of what she was planning. When I tried to discuss the budget with her directly, she acted like I was being petty and controlling. I don't understand why you're making this so complicated, she said during one particularly frustrating phone call. Connor and I have already decided what kind of wedding we want. Your job is just to handle the payments until he can take over. Why are you trying to micromanage every little detail? My job. My job was to pay for her fantasy wedding while being excluded from any actual decision-making. I was the silent financial partner in a project I had no control over, watching my savings account drain away to fund someone else's vision of perfection. Meanwhile, Emma was asking why we couldn't afford the summer art camp she'd been excited about, and I was having to explain that Mommy had some unexpected expenses right now. I was canceling my own vacation plans, postponing necessary home repairs, and driving a car that needed significant maintenance because every available dollar was going toward my sister's wedding. 5 days before the wedding, I received a call that should have been the highlight of my professional month. Dr. Richardson from the trauma center had a personal emergency. His mother was having surgery in another state, and he needed someone to cover an extremely complex case. A multi-vehicle accident victim required immediate reconstructive surgery, the kind of challenging procedure that could add $15,000 to my quarterly income. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning and would likely run 8 to 10 hours. It was exactly the kind of case I'd built my reputation on, the type of work that reminded me why I'd chosen this profession in the first place. More importantly, the additional income would help offset some of the financial stress from the wedding expenses. There was just one problem. Emma had a school holiday that day, and my regular babysitter was unavailable. My backup childcare options had all fallen through due to short notice. I was looking at a professional opportunity worth thousands of dollars, and I couldn't take it because I had no one to watch my 8-year-old daughter for one day. I went through my entire contact list. My neighbor was out of town. My colleague, who sometimes helped with childcare emergencies, was working her own surgery that day. The daycare center Emma usually attended was closed for maintenance. I was running out of options fast. That's when I made the call I should never have had to make. I called my sister, the woman whose wedding I was financing completely, whose every whim I'd been accommodating for months, whose lifestyle I'd been subsidizing for years. I called her and asked for one favor. Could she spend one day watching her niece so I could work a case that would help recover some of the money I was spending on her wedding? "Hi, it's me," I said when she answered. "I have an emergency situation and I really need your help." "What kind of emergency?" she asked, immediately sounding suspicious, as if I was about to ask her to do something unreasonable. I explained the situation, the important surgery, the financial opportunity, Emma needing supervision for just one day while she was off school. I kept my tone calm and matter-of-fact, treating it like the simple favor it should have been between sisters. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched long enough that I thought we might have been disconnected. "You want me to babysit Emma?" she finally said, her voice carrying a tone I couldn't quite identify. "Just for the day," I confirmed. "You could take her to lunch, maybe go to the park, watch some movies. She's 8 years old, she's not difficult to manage, and it would really help me out professionally." Another pause, then, "Alexandra, I can't believe you're asking me this right now. Do you have any idea how stressed I am about the wedding? I have final dress fittings, last-minute vendor confirmations, and Connor is flying in tomorrow night. The last thing I need is to spend my day playing babysitter to your kid." Your kid. She referred to Emma as your kid, as if her niece was some stranger's responsibility rather than family. "It's just for one day," I repeated, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "And it's a really important case for me professionally. The extra income would actually help with some of the wedding expenses." "Look," she said with a sigh, "I'm sorry you're having childcare issues, but that's not really my problem. You chose to have a child. You chose to be a single mother, and you chose to take on these demanding work situations. I didn't sign up to be your backup babysitter just because your planning fell through. I felt something cold settle in my chest, but I tried one more approach. I understand you're busy with wedding preparations, but this is really important to me. I've been working extra cases to help cover the wedding costs, and this would make a significant difference financially. That's exactly my point, she said, her voice getting sharper. You're always talking about money and work like they're the most important things in the world. Maybe if you had better work-life balance, you wouldn't be in these kinds of situations. Work-life balance. The woman who hadn't worked a day in 3 years was lecturing me about work-life balance. Besides, she continued, it's not like this surgery is life or death, right? Can't someone else do it? Why does it have to be you? That question revealed everything I needed to know about how my sister viewed my career. To her, my work as a trauma surgeon was just a job, something I could easily reschedule or delegate when it became inconvenient. She had no understanding that this was someone's life I was talking about, that surgical opportunities like this didn't come around often, that my professional reputation was built on being the person other doctors called when cases were too complex for anyone else. It has to be me because I'm one of the few surgeons in the region qualified to handle this type of reconstruction, I explained. And yes, it could very well be life or death depending on how the surgery goes. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I have my own responsibilities right now. Her own responsibilities, planning her wedding, the wedding I was paying for, the wedding that existed only because I was sacrificing my own financial security to make her dreams come true. And she couldn't watch her niece for 8 hours so I could work a case that would help me afford her fairy tale. What responsibilities exactly? I asked, my patience finally wearing thin. Excuse me? Her voice turned ice cold. What responsibilities do you have that are more important than helping your sister with a work emergency? You don't have a job? Connor isn't even in town yet, and every vendor for your wedding has already been paid and confirmed. What exactly are you doing tomorrow that's so crucial you can't help your niece and your sister? The explosion was immediate. How dare you talk to me like that? Just because you're paying for some things doesn't mean you get to judge how I spend my time or act like you're better than me. I'm not your employee, Alexandra. I'm not your maid. And I'm certainly not your personal babysitter just because you can't manage your own life properly. Not your maid. Not your employee. These were the words that ended everything, though I didn't realize it in that moment. I was too shocked by the sheer audacity of what she'd just said. Here I was, funding her entire wedding, and she was acting like I was the one being unreasonable for asking for help. Fine, I said quietly. I understand. You can't help me. Good. I'm glad you finally get it. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing. Then I called Dr. Richardson and told him I couldn't take the case. $15,000 gone because my sister couldn't be bothered to spend one day with her niece. After I hung up the phone, something fundamental shifted inside me. I sat at my kitchen table for nearly an hour, replaying the conversation and really hearing my sister's words for the first time. I'm not your maid. I'm not your employee. That's not my problem. The irony was so complete it was almost laughable. She wasn't my employee, but I was apparently hers. She wasn't my maid, but I was expected to clean up every financial mess and solve every problem she created. Her childcare emergency wasn't her problem, but my wedding expenses were definitely my responsibility. I pulled out my laptop and started going through the wedding vendor contracts I'd been paying. Every single invoice, every deposit receipt, every payment confirmation. The total had reached $47,000. $47,000 for one day, for someone who couldn't spare 8 hours to help me with a work emergency. But it wasn't really about the money anymore. It was about the casual cruelty of her response, the complete absence of any recognition that I'd been sacrificing for months to make her dreams possible. When I needed her for the first time, not for money, not for some huge favor, just for basic family support, she'd responded like I was imposing on her generosity, rather than asking for help from someone who owed me everything. I thought about Emma, who would have to spend tomorrow at the hospital with me instead of having a fun day off from school because her aunt couldn't be bothered. I thought about the patient who might not get the best possible surgical care because I'd have to turn down the case. I thought about all the times I'd rearranged my schedule, canceled my plans, and put my own life on hold to accommodate my family's needs. And then I thought about my sister, probably planning her nail appointment or shopping for honeymoon clothes, completely unbothered by the fact that she'd just refused to help the person who was making her wedding possible. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I picked up my phone and started making calls. First to the venue. I need to cancel the Morrison wedding scheduled for this Saturday. The coordinator was confused. asking about penalties and whether we wanted to reschedule. No, I said calmly. Complete cancellation. The person responsible for payment is no longer available to cover the costs. Next, the caterer. Same conversation, same result. Then the photographer, the florist, the band, the cake designer. One by one, I systematically canceled every single vendor contract for my sister's wedding. "Ma'am, are you sure about this?" the florist asked. "We've already prepared most of the arrangements. The cancellation fee alone will be substantial." "I'm sure," I replied. "And I'll accept responsibility for any cancellation fees that are legitimately owed. But no additional services should be provided." The most satisfying call was to the dress shop. My sister's $4,000 gown was ready for final pickup, but since I was the one who'd put the deposit on my credit card, I had the authority to cancel that too. "The customer will be very upset," the seamstress warned me. "She's been so excited about this dress and the alterations are perfect." "The customer should have thought about that before she decided that family obligations don't apply to her," I said. Each phone call felt like lifting a weight off my shoulders. With every vendor I canceled, I felt more clarity about what I was doing and why it was absolutely the right decision. This wasn't spite or revenge. This was setting a boundary that should have been set months ago. By the time I'd finished calling every vendor, it was nearly midnight. My phone had been buzzing with texts from my parents. My sister had apparently called them in a panic when the venue contacted her about the cancellation, but I wasn't ready to deal with their calls yet. First, I needed to make sure Emma was taken care of tomorrow. I called my colleague, Dr. Martinez, explained the situation, and asked if her teenage daughter could watch Emma during the surgery. She agreed immediately, mentioning that her daughter needed some extra spending money anyway. Problem solved, with help from someone who actually understood what family support looked like. Then I called Dr. Richardson back. "I've resolved my childcare situation," I told him. "I can take the case tomorrow after all." "Are you sure?" he asked. "I know this was complicated for you." "I'm absolutely sure," I said. In fact, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I woke up the next morning with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since this wedding planning nightmare began, I wasn't thinking about vendor deadlines, payment schedules, or my sister's endless list of demands. Instead, I was focused on what actually mattered, preparing for a complex surgery that could save someone's life. Emma was excited about spending the day with Dr. Martinez's daughter, Sophia, who had promised to take her to the Science Museum and teach her some Spanish. As I dropped Emma off that morning, I realized this was what real family support looked like. People helping each other without keeping score, without making the person asking for help feel like a burden. The surgery went even better than expected. The patient was a 22-year-old college student who'd been in a devastating car accident, and the reconstructive work I was able to do would likely restore full function to his damaged hand. These were the moments that reminded me why I'd chosen medicine, the opportunity to use my skills to genuinely change someone's life for the better. During my lunch break, I checked my phone for the first time all day. 53 missed calls and over 100 text messages. The wedding was supposed to be tomorrow, and apparently word had gotten out about the cancellations. My sister had called me 17 times since 6 in the morning. My parents had called repeatedly. Even some of the wedding vendors had called, probably hoping to understand what was happening and whether there was any chance of salvaging their contracts. But I wasn't ready to deal with the chaos yet. I was in the middle of something important, something that actually mattered. So I put my phone back in my locker and returned to the operating room. The surgery lasted 9 hours total, and by the time I emerged, I was exhausted, but satisfied. We'd successfully reconstructed the damaged tissue, and the patient's prognosis was excellent. This was what I was meant to be doing with my time, saving lives, not funding fantasy weddings for people who couldn't spare a day to help me in return. When I finally retrieved my phone that evening, the missed call count had reached into the triple digits. My voicemail was completely full. The text messages ranged from confused to angry to borderline hysterical. From my mother: "Alexandra, please call us immediately. There's been some terrible mistake with the wedding vendors. We need to fix this right away." From my father: "Sweetheart, I don't understand what happened, but we need to talk. Your sister is beside herself." From my sister: "Call me right now. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you need to fix this immediately. The wedding is tomorrow." Game. She thought this was a game. She thought I'd canceled her entire wedding as some kind of joke or manipulation tactic, not as a direct response to her complete lack of consideration for me and my daughter. The most telling messages were the ones from later in the day, after my sister had apparently tried to reinstate the vendor contracts herself. Several vendors had called to confirm that they couldn't provide services without payment, And my sister had learned that Connor's promised financial resources were somehow still unavailable. The venue is asking for full payment upfront to reinstate the contract, one of her messages read. Connor's money is still tied up, so you need to call them back and straighten this out. They're being completely unreasonable about this. Unreasonable. A business expecting payment for services was being unreasonable. But a sister refusing to watch her niece for one day wasn't unreasonable at all. I drove home slowly, taking time to process everything that had happened. This morning, I'd been trapped in a situation where I was expected to provide unlimited financial support while receiving no consideration in return. Tonight, I was free from that trap. The wedding was canceled, the vendors were canceled, and my sister was finally facing the reality of what her dreams actually cost. The most liberating part was realizing that I didn't feel guilty. I'd tried to be the supportive sister, the reliable daughter, the family problem solver. I'd given thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours, and countless compromises. And when I'd asked for one small favor in return, I'd been treated like I was being unreasonable and demanding. Well, if I was going to be called unreasonable anyway, I might as well actually be unreasonable. If I was going to be accused of controlling behavior, I might as well actually exercise some control, starting with control over my own money and my own boundaries. I walked into my apartment that evening to find my landline answering machine blinking with the maximum number of messages it could hold. My cell phone had finally stopped buzzing only because the battery had died during surgery. When I plugged it into charge, it immediately came back to life with a stream of notifications that seemed to go on forever. The messages told the story of a day that had apparently descended into complete chaos. It started with confusion, my parents calling to ask if there had been some kind of mistake with the vendor cancellations. Then came panic as my sister realized this wasn't an error, but a deliberate action. Finally came desperation as they all realized that the wedding was scheduled to happen in 18 hours, and every essential vendor had been canceled. Alexandra, this is your mother. I don't understand what's happening, but people are saying the wedding is canceled. Please call me back immediately so we can sort this out. It's Dad. Your sister is crying hysterically. She says you canceled everything for her wedding. That can't be true. Please call us so we can figure out what really happened. Alexandra, it's me. My sister's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to call every single vendor back and fix this mess. The wedding is tomorrow. Tomorrow. You can't just destroy months of planning because you're having some kind of breakdown. The messages progressed through the day, becoming increasingly frantic as my family realized that most vendors wouldn't reinstate canceled contracts without full payment up front, payment that neither my sister nor Connor could apparently provide. The florist wants $4,000 in cash to provide the arrangements tomorrow. My sister's voice was shaking now. The photographer won't even take our calls. The caterer says they've already booked another event for tomorrow night. You need to fix this right now. But the most interesting messages were the ones that revealed what was happening with Connor. Around message 37, the tone shifted from anger to confusion to something approaching panic. Connor's business partners are saying they can't release his funds until Monday. My sister's voice was smaller now, less certain, but that doesn't matter because you're going to call the vendors back anyway, right? You're not actually going to let my wedding be destroyed over one stupid babysitting request. One stupid babysitting request. Even in crisis mode, she couldn't acknowledge that refusing to help with Emma had been wrong. Even facing the complete collapse of her wedding day, she was still characterizing my request as unreasonable. Message 43 was from my mother. Sweetheart, we've been trying to reach Connor all day to see if he can resolve the payment issues with the vendors, but he's not answering his phone. Your sister says he's in important business meetings, but this is becoming very concerning. By message 50, even my father sounded worried. Alexandra, I think we need to have a serious family conversation about everything that's been happening. There are some things about this wedding situation that aren't adding up, and we need to figure out what's really going on. The final message on my answering machine was from my sister, recorded just an hour before I got home. I've been calling you for 12 hours. 12 hours. Do you understand that my wedding is tomorrow and I have no venue, no food, no flowers, no music? Guests are already traveling here. People have taken time off work, bought gifts, made arrangements. You can't just destroy all of that because you're mad at me. But it was the text messages that really told the story of how the day had unfolded. My sister had apparently spent hours trying to reinstate vendor contracts herself, only to discover that the wedding industry doesn't work that way. You can't cancel everything and then expect to reinstate it 24 hours later without consequences. Some vendors were willing to work with her, but only with full payment up front and significant penalty fees. Others had already committed their services to other events. The dress shop informed her that while the gown was still available, it would cost an additional $1,500 to rush the final alterations for pickup tomorrow. Most telling were the texts about Connor's mysterious absence during this crisis. My sister had been calling and texting him frantically all day, but he wasn't responding to her attempts to reach him. His business partners claimed he was in emergency meetings that couldn't be interrupted, even for a wedding emergency. Connor finally called back. One of her texts read, "He's devastated about everything, and he's trying to liquidate some assets to cover the vendor costs. But it might take a few days to get the money together." A few days. The wedding was tomorrow, and Connor needed a few days to get money together. Either he wasn't nearly as wealthy as he'd claimed, or he was remarkably bad at managing his finances during emergencies. I finally returned my parents' calls that evening, but I was calm and resolved in a way that seemed to unnerve them more than if I'd been angry or emotional. They'd clearly expected me to be apologetic, ready to fix the situation and restore the wedding plans. Instead, they found someone who had thought everything through and wasn't changing her mind. "Alexandra, thank God," Mom said when she answered. "We've been worried sick. What happened with all the vendors? How do we fix this?" "There's nothing to fix," I said simply. "I canceled the wedding because I'm no longer willing to pay for it." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Dad's voice came on. They'd put me on speakerphone. "Sweetheart, we know you're upset about the babysitting situation, but canceling the entire wedding seems extreme." "It's not about babysitting," I explained. "It's about the fact that I've been financing my sister's lifestyle for years. And when I needed one small favor in return, she told me it wasn't her problem. That made me realize this entire arrangement isn't working for anyone." "But the guests," Mom protested. "People have traveled from out of state. Your sister is devastated. Surely we can work something out." "Where's Connor in all this?" I asked. "Where's the man who promised to pay me back with interest? Where's the successful businessman who insisted money was no object for his bride?" Another long pause. I could hear whispered conversation in the background before Dad came back on the line. "Connor's been trying to access his funds all day, but there are some complications with his business accounts." "What kind of complications exactly?" "Well," Mom's voice was hesitant. "It seems like his money is tied up in some kind of legal issue. Something about an investigation into his business practices." The pieces clicked into place immediately. Connor wasn't having cash flow problems. He was under investigation. The mysterious travel, the vague business descriptions, the inability to meet family members, the sudden financial difficulties right before the wedding. My sister had gotten engaged to someone who was likely involved in something illegal. "Has my sister been told about this investigation?" I asked. "We're not entirely sure what to tell her," Dad admitted. "Connor asked us not to worry her with the details while he's trying to resolve everything." "Where is Connor right now?" We don't actually know," Mom said quietly. "He was supposed to fly in tonight for the rehearsal dinner, but his flight was canceled. Or delayed. Or something. Your sister has been trying to reach him all evening." I felt a strange combination of vindication and sadness. Vindication that my instincts about Connor had been correct, but sadness that my sister was about to learn some very hard truths about the man she thought she was marrying. "You need to tell my sister everything you know about Connor's situation," I said. "She deserves to know what she's really dealing with." "But if we tell her, it might ruin everything," Mom protested. "Mom, everything is already ruined. The wedding is canceled. Connor is missing, and apparently he's under criminal investigation. My sister needs to face reality, not live in a fantasy that's being funded by other people's money." The next morning, I woke up to find my phone surprisingly quiet. Only 3 missed calls overnight, compared to the dozens from the day before. When I checked my messages, I found out why. Connor had disappeared completely. His phone was going straight to voicemail. His business contacts claimed they didn't know where he was, and his hotel reservation for the wedding weekend had been canceled. My sister had spent the night calling hospitals and police stations, thinking something terrible had happened to him. It wasn't until Sunday afternoon that the truth came out. Connor hadn't been in an accident or detained by business emergencies. He'd fled the state when he realized my family didn't actually have money to support his lifestyle or cover his legal problems. A mutual acquaintance finally revealed that Connor had been running elaborate cons on women he met through dating apps, convincing them to support him financially while he fought various legal battles. My sister had been his mark, not his fiancée. The engagement ring was fake. The promises of repayment were lies. The entire relationship had been designed to extract as much money as possible from my family before he moved on to his next victim. 6 months later, I've rebuilt my relationship with my parents, who finally understood the impossible position they'd put me in for years. My sister moved to another city to start over, humiliated by the realization that she'd been completely fooled by Connor's scam. She sent me a letter of apology eventually, acknowledging that she'd taken my support for granted and treated me unfairly. Emma and I are thriving. Without the constant financial drain of supporting my extended family's unrealistic expectations, I've been able to save for her college fund, take the vacation we'd postponed, and even consider buying a larger house. More importantly, I've learned to value my own time and resources, and to set boundaries that protect both my daughter and myself. The $15,000 I earned from that emergency surgery went into Emma's education fund, and every time I face a difficult decision about family obligations, I remember how it felt to finally say no to demands that weren't reasonable, and how much peace came from prioritizing the people who actually deserved my support.